without any further ado, I would like to introduce our very special guest tonight, who is a legend in the realm of commerce and the freedom movement, Mr. Winston Shrout. Hello, Winston. How you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Really good. It's really exciting to have you with us because you are very, very knowledgeable on a lot of the problems that people are facing, and you're very well researched, and it's just great to be able to have you here. And so I think tonight what we were going to discuss, since there's a lot of people that have IRS issues that are looking for effective and safe remedies to kind of get the IRS to go away or to resolve issues that they have so they can live their lives peacefully. Did you have any kind of a prelude or script that you wanted to start off with?
Yeah, actually I do. Perhaps I'll give a little bit of history of who and what the IRS actually is. I think a lot of people are confused about what they're dealing with when they hear the word IRS. And so I thought maybe what I'd do is go back in time maybe about 80 years or so and bring people up to speed.
Okay.
Well, as I mentioned, we have to go back 80 or 90 years in order to bring some kind of an understanding of exactly what it is that we're dealing with. And, there's a lot of buzzwords that go around, probably misunderstood. And so I think perhaps people draw the wrong conclusions in many instances because they use buzzwords that they have no idea where they came from or what they actually mean. So I think it'd probably be a good review, historical review, so that people can perhaps get a grasp of exactly what it is we're dealing with here. So I'll go back maybe as far as the early 1900s.
Okay.
And there was a lot of activity going on back there that you can't hardly find in the history books. But what it amounts to, and I'll use the term loosely, and the term I'll use is one world government. Now, before anybody jumps up and starts getting excited, let me explain that one world government has always been with us. And it's not a institution, it's not an organization, but it is in fact more or less the controlling powers on the planet. Many of whom perhaps are private individuals, some of them may be families, and so forth. And people like to throw around the word Illuminati and all that kind of thing without really knowing what it is they're talking about. But for the longest time, the world controlling powers, those who actually control the gold, it goes back to the same old thing we say, he who controls the gold makes the rules. And so that's the way that it's been for actually centuries. And perhaps even we ought to go back a little bit further into perhaps the 1700s, into the 1800s to really discover the basis for this. And so as we go back that far, there is an interesting individual that pops up, and he's generally known as Saint Germain, or the Count Saint Germain. Now, he pops up in history, especially in French history, and he even pops up in American history at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He is, in fact, the party that was referred to as the Old Professor. And so we have some interaction with Saint Germain in the founding of this country, this nation. But he principally pops up in Europe, very active during the French Revolution period, because there were certain things that he was trying to accomplish at that time, and which he did. But in any event, during the period we're talking about here, the perhaps late 1700s into the early 1800s, he was making an effort to combine the assets of the royal families of Europe and Asia. And his design in doing so was to basically stop war and to get these families to use the wealth that had been accumulated over the centuries for the benefit of the people on the planet. And he was successful in his mission and in his persuasion, because the ancient royal families and so forth decided to combine their wealth, and they commenced to intermarry and put their wealth into trusts. Now this continued on down through the ages, and the intermarrying and so forth went on. It's kind of like a reverse family tree. And so certainly by the late part of the 1800s, this process had produced one man whom they had confidence in to administer the values that were contained in these trusts. He's loosely referred to as M1. In any event, M1, well, you can read a little bit of his history and so forth, but basically what had happened by certainly the early 1900s was that the wealth that had been accumulated, a good portion of it was actually taken into the Philippine Islands. And there it was hidden up in caves or whatever. I mean, I think everybody's heard the stories about all that. It's an interesting story and so forth, and perfectly valid. But in any event, if you start to think about this whole concept as being, the one world government, what we're actually talking about is the assets held in trust, from centuries gone by. And so that wealth was being amassed at that particular period of time in anticipation of future events. Now, one of the things that was being undertaken with the use of those assets was the destruction or the removal of colonialism and imperialism. As if you go back and study history, you certainly see that many of the nations, principally England, Spain, France, Holland, and some of the others, had been circling the globe, and especially in undeveloped areas, had been involved in colonialism and imperialism to the detriment of the people so affected. And so one of the purposes, certainly, of the accumulation of this wealth and the administration of it was to prevent, stop, and reverse the effects of colonialism. Now, to facilitate this, as I mentioned, this wealth was accumulated. Much of it was stored in various places in the Philippine Islands. And as a result of that, to administer the revenue of that wealth. In other words, revenue means to change the place of. And so the word revenue here figures in very heavily. And so to keep track of the revenue there was created back in the, let's say, 1920s or so. I'm not really sure the exact date of this, but there was the Bureau of Internal Revenue, which was created in the Philippine Islands. Now, what did happen in the 1930s, principally I believe in 34 and 35, was that the Bureau of Internal Revenue created and stored vast amounts of Federal Reserve notes. Now, these Federal Reserve notes were actually in the form of bonds, and they were in denominations of anywhere, the denominations were 100 million and 500 million bonds, complete with coupons. And some of the people probably listening to this call have maybe seen some of those facsimiles of some of those things, or maybe some of the people have actually seen some of them, themselves. But anyway, these were placed into boxes of certain values. Some of the boxes, which are referred to as the Treaty of Versailles boxes, actually have face value on the FRNs to be around 3 trillion. And the other Wells Fargo boxes are probably a whole lot less than that. But anyway, there were literally trillions upon trillions of Federal Reserve note/bonds that were created at that time for use in world commerce. A lot of people don't understand that the United States dollar is not a national currency. It's an international currency. The United States is probably the only country on the planet that does not have its own currency. And so what's called the U.S. dollar is actually international currency, and the basis for it is the FRNs that were created in I think 1935, and so that's the basis then for the Federal Reserve notes and things that are in use today as a world currency. So the whole basis then, when we start talking about internal revenue, is in fact the Bureau of Internal Revenue in Philippines, based upon the gold that was stockpiled there, again for the purpose of ridding the planet of colonialism. It was certainly in the interest of the Asian people, the African people, perhaps many of the South American countries, or certainly what we would call third world countries, that this colonialism should stop. Now, this was in anticipation of World War II. World War I and World War II were actually contrived wars. Anybody who studied World War I and World War II will certainly see that that those wars were not based upon moral principles; they were simply commercial wars. And so, in anticipation of the Second World War, certainly the what's called the New Deal under President Franklin D. Roosevelt was actually funded from this gold and so forth that had been accumulated in the Philippine Islands.